Roose Bolton, despite his reputation as a cold and calculating lord, can be examined through a lens that allows for the possibility of redemption. Unlike many overtly cruel figures, his actions are often rooted in logic rather than sadistic pleasure. This distinction is important because it suggests that his behavior is shaped by worldview and circumstance, rather than an inherent love of suffering. If morality is, in part, a learned structure, then it is theoretically possible that Roose could have evolved under different influences. His upbringing in the harsh and politically unstable North may have contributed to his detached outlook on life. In a world where power is constantly contested and weakness is punished, survival often demands emotional restraint. Roose appears to have internalized this to an extreme degree, suppressing empathy in favor of calculated decisions. This does not excuse his actions, but provides a framework to understand how he became who he is, which is a necessary step when considering redemption. Another aspect worth examining is his restraint compared to other villains. Roose does not revel openly in brutality, nor does he seek unnecessary violence. His cruelty is often efficient and purposeful, lacking the chaotic cruelty seen in characters like Roose Bolton. This restraint might indicate that he is not beyond moral reasoning, but rather operates within a different ethical system, one that prioritizes order and personal gain over compassion. There are moments where Roose displays a subtle awareness of consequences, particularly in his interactions with Ramsay. He recognizes his son's instability and even criticizes it, suggesting that he understands the dangers of unchecked cruelty. This awareness could imply that Roose has a sense of boundaries, however faint, and that he is capable of distinguishing between strategic harshness and destructive excess. Redemption often requires the capacity for reflection, and while Roose rarely expresses regret, his careful and measured speech hints at a man who thinks deeply about his choices. He is not impulsive, nor is he driven by blind hatred. This intellectual nature could, in theory, allow for a shift in perspective if he were confronted with circumstances that challenged his worldview in a meaningful way. It is also worth noting that Roose operates within a feudal system that rewards betrayal and punishes loyalty when it is politically inconvenient. His infamous betrayal is shocking from a moral standpoint, but within the logic of his world, it secures his family's position. If the system itself incentivizes such actions, then Roose becomes as much a product of that system as he is an individual actor, which complicates the question of moral responsibility. Furthermore, Roose does not appear to take pleasure in chaos or destruction for its own sake. His goals are stability and control, even if achieved through morally reprehensible means. This focus on order could be redirected under different circumstances, potentially allowing him to act in ways that are less harmful if it aligned with his interests. His emotional detachment, while disturbing, might also be seen as a defense mechanism rather than a fixed trait. If so, it raises the possibility that under the right conditions, perhaps involving trust, loss, or genuine connection, he could develop a deeper emotional awareness. Such growth is rare in his world, but not entirely impossible. However, redemption would require a significant shift in values, including an acknowledgement of the humanity of others. Whether Roose is capable of such a transformation remains uncertain, but the absence of overt sadism suggests that he is not entirely closed off to moral change. The question is not whether he would choose redemption, but whether he possesses the capacity for it at all. In the end, viewing Roose Bolton as redeemable depends on whether one believes that rationality can evolve into empathy. His story offers no clear evidence of this transformation, but it leaves open a narrow possibility. In a different world, or under different pressures, he might have become a very different man. Despite the theoretical arguments in favor of redemption, Roose Bolton's actions present a far stronger case that he is fundamentally irredeemable. His defining trait is not merely coldness, but a complete lack of moral hesitation when committing acts that devastate others. This absence of internal conflict is one of the clearest indicators that redemption is unlikely, as it suggests he does not recognize his actions as wrong in any meaningful sense. The betrayal of Robb Stark is not just a strategic move. It is an act that violates deeply held cultural and moral codes, even within the brutal world he inhabits. Guest right is sacred, and breaking it is considered one of the most heinous crimes imaginable. Roose participates in this betrayal without visible remorse, demonstrating a willingness to discard even the most fundamental ethical boundaries when it suits him. His relationship with Ramsay further underscores his moral emptiness. While he acknowledges Ramsay's cruelty, he ultimately enables and legitimizes it, granting him power and status. This is not the behavior of someone who seeks to mitigate harm, but of someone who prioritizes legacy and control over the suffering of others. His criticism of Ramsay feels pragmatic rather than moral, focusing on effectiveness rather than ethics. Roose's treatment of those under his authority reveals a pattern of dehumanization. He views people as assets to be managed, rather than individuals with intrinsic worth. This perspective is deeply ingrained and not easily altered, as it forms the foundation of how he understands the world. Without recognizing the humanity of others, true redemption becomes nearly impossible. Unlike characters who struggle with guilt or inner turmoil, Roose shows no signs of emotional conflict. He does not grapple with his decisions or question their impact. This lack of introspection is a critical barrier to redemption, as change typically begins with self-awareness and a sense of wrongdoing. Roose's calm demeanor is not a sign of control, but of indifference. Additionally, his actions are not driven by necessity alone. While the political landscape is harsh, there are other characters who navigate it without resorting to such extreme betrayals. Roose chooses his path deliberately, indicating that his behavior is not merely reactive, but reflective of his personal values. This makes it harder to attribute his actions solely to circumstance. His calculated nature also works against the idea of redemption. Because he is so deliberate in his choices, it is difficult to argue that he acts out of ignorance or impulse. He understands the consequences of his actions and proceeds regardless, which suggests a level of moral clarity that leaves little room for transformation. The absence of empathy in Roose's character is perhaps the most damning factor. Redemption often involves a reconnection with others, a recognition of shared humanity that leads to remorse and change. Roose's emotional detachment prevents this process from even beginning, as he lacks the emotional foundation necessary for such growth. Moreover, there is no narrative indication that Roose seeks or desires redemption. He is content with his position and his methods, seeing them as effective and justified. Without a desire to change, the possibility of redemption remains purely hypothetical and detached from his actual character arc. Ultimately, Roose Bolton represents a form of villainy that is rooted in indifference rather than passion. This makes him uniquely resistant to redemption, as there is no internal struggle to resolve, no moral awakening waiting to occur. He is not a man who has fallen from grace, but one who never valued it to begin with, and that distinction places him firmly beyond redemption. Another crucial point against Roose Bolton's redemption is his understanding of legacy. He is not merely acting for survival in the present. He is actively shaping a future built on fear, manipulation, and dominance. His decisions are long-term and intentional, designed to secure his house's power regardless of moral cost. This forward-thinking cruelty suggests that his actions are not momentary lapses, but part of a consistent philosophy, one that leaves little room for ethical reconsideration. His emotional neutrality in the face of suffering also reinforces the idea that he lacks the internal mechanisms required for change. Where others might experience hesitation, guilt, or even fleeting doubt, Roose remains composed and unaffected. This is not strength, but a void where empathy should exist. Without emotional friction, there is nothing to challenge his behavior from within, making transformation not only unlikely but structurally improbable. Finally, Roose's worldview appears self-validating. Because his methods often succeed in achieving his goals, he has no incentive to question them. Success reinforces his belief that morality is secondary to effectiveness, creating a cycle where results justify means. In such a mindset, redemption would require not just a shift in behavior, but a complete dismantling of the logic he has relied on his entire life. A change so profound that it borders on impossibility.